All right, if you thought that question about the Birds or the 49ers was an easy question, I want to ask you an easier question. What is real? What is true? What should we honor as good and right and worth pursuing? And what should we reject as wrong and bad, not good? Further, why is this world such a strange mix, like unbelievable beauty, unbelievable ugliness? People at their worst and nastiest, compassion and mercy. This is such a crazy world we live in. But I am convinced it is also something else. This is an absolutely amazing world that we live in. And that was really driven home to me last week. So I just want to show you where I got to be last week. My family got to scuba dive together off of Cozumel. And the Beatles say it's an octopus's garden. And that's what it is. It's this beautiful, amazing garden, verdant, flourishing, constantly moving, constantly changing. And it's filled with the strangest creatures you could ever imagine. In fact, it's almost like going to another planet. It is filled with the strangest little creatures you can imagine. And it's like, seriously, creatures from another planet. And sometimes it even seems like God just wanted to have fun. Like, hey, let's make something with polka dots. Like, it is just unbelievable, the creatures that you meet down there. And here is the most amazing thing. For thousands of years, human beings had no idea that this universe was going on. Before the invention of glass, all they saw was the gray surface of the ocean, totally unaware that this whole universe was living and inhabiting the same planet. So think about you and me right now. Here we are sitting, we're looking around, world looks pretty normal. No, at this very moment, that is going on. As we sit here, this entire other universe is sharing the earth. It's amazing to me. And on a very practical level, the part that I love the most about scuba diving is you go out in these dive boats with other people. So there's usually about 16 people, and you're all sitting like really close for hours at a time. So we got to meet people from all over the world. I had conversations with people from 5 different states, people from Canada, people from Mexico, people from England, people from Vietnam. And all of these people are very different, like different worlds they come from, different native languages. We had very different sexual orientations. We had very different understandings of politics. So it was like about as diverse as you can get. The only thing we held in common was this deep love and reverence for the coral reef. And it wasn't until after I got home and I was thinking about what our family had experienced that I realized that what I wanted to say to my friends, these new friends I had met, was the coral reef is absolutely so amazing. But here's what I'm convinced of. The Bible is the ultimate coral reef. It reveals a wild, strange, beautiful garden full of life and death, just like the coral reefs I see. It reveals the world beneath the surface that dances with light and life and beauty and motion. It is waiting there just like the reef, waiting for you to dive in and explore it. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to be able to do together here in a few minutes. In fact, not only is the Bible, in my mind, like the ultimate coral reef, it was actually written for people like my scuba diving friends. Did you know that it was happy pagans Or maybe today we'd say happy secularists. People who were adventure-seeking, intellectually curious, open-minded non-Christians, like a lot of my scuba diving friends, that are actually the heroes of a story in the Bible, while religious people don't look so good. As a matter of fact, they're not only the heroes in a story, they are a hero in the most central story there is in the Bible, which is the story of the birth of Jesus Christ on the first Christmas morning. I'm talking about we three kings. I'm talking about the wise men. I'm talking about the Magi, this story that many of you heard when you were little kids, these adventurers who came looking for a newborn king and followed this star and then came with gold and frankincense and myrrh. There is an ancient Christmas carol that many of you know that begins like this. What star is this? And notice the question mark up there. That reflects an open, intellectually curious stance by someone who's looking up at the night sky, full of wonder, open to the possibilities. What could it mean? And that's the stance I'm asking you to take for a few minutes now when we go to this coral reef of the Bible. But before we get to it, what is the deal with this story of the wise men? Is it just a baby story? Is it a fairy tale, a myth, a nice tradition we have for the kids so we can see them all up there in the Christian Christmas pageant? Is there anything more to it than that? In other words, is there any evidence that it actually happened? In other words, is this strange, wild story actually part of the history of the world in the same way that the strange, wild coral reef is part of the history of this world? Some of you know I have a tradition of teaching this story at this time of year because for me, like the coral reef, it never gets old and it's worth hearing again and again. So, what do we actually know? Like historically, what do we actually know is true about this story, if anything? Well, first, we know for sure there really were such people as the Magi, as wise men in the Middle East at the time of Jesus. They came from the east compared to Jerusalem. They came from Babylon in modern-day Iraq. We know they are real people. They were well-to-do scholar philosophers, the forerunners of scientists, and they wanted to know what is true in this world. And so they were famous for their ability to study and read the stars and the planets, and they kept very careful records. In fact, we have their records. They're careful measurements of how things were moving. And so they really were the foundation for modern astronomy. Okay, so there really were these Magi, and they were well-to-do and wealthy, and they lived in the luxury at that time, like the seven wonders of the world. They lived in Babylon. Would really rich aristocrats living a comfortable life in Babylon really travel 700 miles across the desert just because they saw a star? In 66 AD, people in Rome heard a strange noise and saw a strange sight. Around the corner came horses, magically dressed with bells tied to their manes, and on them, these strangely dressed men, the Magi. In 66 AD, this is secular history, Magi appeared in Rome to congratulate Nero as the new emperor. They'd seen signs in the sky, and they came to congratulate him. So what does this tell us? There really were Magi, and this is what they did. They went out on these journeys according to what they thought they were seeing in the stars. Okay, so what does the Bible say about the Magi and the birth of Christ? We come to our scripture for this morning. It's Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. What we Christians believe is God's word. Here's what it tells us. Starting in verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." So what does this tell us so far? They were seeing what they thought were signs in the sky that a new king had been born, King of the Jews. So where do you go? Well, you go to their country, and then where do you go? You go to the capital, because that's where kings live. So they went to the capital, Jerusalem. And what happened next? Verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Why? Because he was king. And he did not like the idea of some usurper taking that away. And it's funny I love the way it puts it, all of Jerusalem, but it doesn't mean every person. It means the elite, everybody in the know. Why? Because they all have positions of power and influence, and they like the way things are going just fine. So none of them want this to happen. So what does Herod do? When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, so he holds a summit, he asked them where the Christ was to be born, and he asked that because the Jews at that time were convinced there really was a Messiah who was going to come. The Messiah and the Christ is the same thing. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." Quote, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel." So they are quoting an Old Testament prophecy from the prophet Micah, chapter 5, verse 2. Guess when that was written? 700 years before Christ. So they have been waiting 700 years for this Messiah figure to come. That's a long time to wait. I mean, I keep praying to God and waiting to see the world change, and I get frustrated after a year. 700 years of politics as normal. 700 years of life as normal, and it looks like nothing is ever going to change. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Why? Because now he knows the date the baby was born. What's interesting is that Bethlehem at that time was like Nowheresville. Like if you think of some town in Pennsylvania, you're like, man, nothing's going on there. It is like backwater. It's like there's no hope there. That's what Bethlehem was. It looked like nothing good could ever happen there. And that's where this was about to happen. Herod sees himself as king of the Jews. He has no interest in losing that power, so he comes up with a plan. Verse 8. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Oh, the sweet, lying words of a politician. Many of you know how the story goes. If you read all chapter 2, he doesn't want to go to worship him. He wants to kill him. So he's going to let them do the dirty work, find out where he is, and then he's going to go and kill him. And we find out later he wanted to be very effective. So he goes to this small hamlet, sends his soldiers there and says, "Kill every boy under the age of 2. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen." So I want you to think about this. The pagans, the unreligious wise men, use their intellect to calculate a journey to find a newborn king, while the religious person, Herod, who even built a temple, uses his intellect to calculate how to kill the king. The unreligious people use their wealth and power to seek and to learn. The religious person uses his to control and dominate. So, what do these people do? Based on the information from some ancient Hebrew scriptures, the wise men make a course correction and now head to Bethlehem. Man, is there a message for us there? They took the best information they had at the time, they set out, and then as they're going on their journey, they realize, oh wait, we got it wrong, we need to adjust. At this moment in your life, do you need to make a course adjustment? Verse 9. After visiting Herod, they went away, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So they started out on a journey. It looked like a dead end. They made a course adjustment. They kept going, and now a new sign and new hope. They still didn't know what they were going to find. They didn't have any guarantees, but they continued in the direction that the Bible told them to go. How's that for a message for me? They continued in the direction that the Bible told them to go. Okay, so Langdon, let me get this straight. There are magi, they're real, that actually happens. They actually do follow signs in the heavens to try and find newborn kings. But was there really a magical star of Bethlehem? The problem is not that there was no astronomical things happening at the time of the birth of Jesus. The problem is there's a lot of things that were happening, and so people have different theories which one was the star. So I'm going to tell you which one I think makes the most sense. I can't prove this, but I'm pretty sure. Here's the deal. First clue. Herod was taken by surprise. It turns out that the Magi read the heavenly signs all the time, right? That's what they were constantly doing. But Herod and Jerusalem had no idea. They were caught by surprise. So that implies it was not something sudden like Halley's Comet. Everybody would have seen that. And they would have talked about it. In fact, the Magi viewed such irregular events as Halley's Comet as bad signs, the sign of a catastrophe. No, it would have been the predictable movement of the known bodies in their heavenly dance that the Magi would have been looking at. So what's my point? Only those who were looking would have noticed. It wasn't something dramatic at first. The Magi considered the star Regulus the king star, and Jupiter was the king planet. So imagine they're back in Babylon and they see the king planet and the king star come together, and then the king planet begins to move on a journey. There's going to be a king, and this is where you're going to find him. It continues on. Then comes the moment that really looks like it could have been the Star of Bethlehem. What you're looking at is the actual footage from June 2015 of Jupiter and Venus aligning in what astronomers call a conjunction. So you know how bright Jupiter and Venus are, like the two brightest stars coming together. That is super bright. Now here's the cool part. Astronomers have these models for the movement of the planets. They're able to roll them back through time. And it turns out that on June 17th, 2 BC, right around when we think Jesus was actually born, if you were standing in Jerusalem, you'd see this giant star at the horizon directly over Bethlehem, 9 miles away. Okay, so there's a star and it's pointing to Jerusalem, but listen, it says it stopped and stayed there. That doesn't happen. We know that planets and comets don't stand still. Well, let's go to the next slide. The simulation you see on the left is what you grew up with in high school to how you would understand all the planets in our solar system going around the sun. But the problem is, where's the viewpoint for that? You're standing out in the galaxy looking at the planets. But how would it actually look from the Earth? So remember, all the planets are spinning, but we're actually turning as we go. Look at how the outer planets seem to change direction. It's called a retrograde. And notice those loops. You know what that means? If you were watching, you'd see the planet go like this, and then stay, and then reverse direction. That is what happened. Is that amazing? Isn't it amazing? So does this prove 100% there really was a star of Bethlehem, there really were the Magi? No, it doesn't prove it 100%. What it proves is it is incredibly reasonable to believe this actually happened. And what it reminds us is this world is a lot crazier, a lot more mysterious than we realize. It's just the way the Bible says it is. So here is this story in the Bible that at first glance looks like a child's fairy tale. And yet when we dig down beneath the surface, we find it is far wilder and far stranger than we ever thought. It's as magical as a coral reef. And of course, the crazy thing about coral reefs with all their magical creatures is that they're real. So like adventurous scuba divers, the wise men were willing to travel to a distant place to see what they could find there. And what did they do once they got there? Verse 11, after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him. Then opened their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In other words, gifts fit for a king. Now you've got to get how wild this is. So imagine a billionaire from Google wearing his $1,000 silk suit, down on his knees in the dust at a hovel before a peasant girl and her little baby. That's what this was. And it gets even wilder. This story only shows up in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew's called the Jewish Gospel. Why? It was written by a Jewish man to the Jewish people to try to convince them that Jesus really was the Messiah they were looking for. So if you read Matthew, there's all kinds of Old Testament quotes in it, and it assumes a Jewish culture. Yet in his story, it's not the Jewish, but the non-believing who are the heroes in this story. Why would he do that? To demonstrate that the Christian faith wasn't meant just for people who were born into it. To demonstrate that religious people like Herod can totally miss the truth, while non-religious people see it. To drive home the fact that what matters to God is not your label, it's your heart. That's what matters. And it is to remind us that it takes being open-minded, adventurous, willing to take risks if you're ever going to encounter Jesus. So, what can we learn from these wise men? They thought, and then they sought, and then they found, and then they bowed. They thought, but they didn't stop with just thinking. They got up and went. They thought, they sought, they found, they bowed. You see, these guys, with all their privilege, when they encountered truth, they submitted to it. When they saw this child, they didn't completely understand the Christian story. They didn't understand all the details. When they saw this child, somehow they recognized that they were in the presence of something holy. So my question is, are you willing to do the same? If you sense a reality, even though you can't prove it, are you willing to pursue it? If the intuitive part of you is telling you that it's true, are you willing to investigate it? even if the cool kids in our culture are telling you not to. You see, at that moment, in the presence of this baby, they understood that up until now, they'd only been looking at a very small part of a very big picture. Up until now, they had been following just a solitary star. But now they suddenly realized that reality was far bigger and far wilder than they could have ever guessed. What if the one who holds the stars and the cosmos in his hands decided to come into the cosmos as a helpless baby? Here's what the Bible declares about this baby born at Christmas time. By him, all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Because the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay, well, that's in the Bible, but how do we know that the first Christians really thought all of this? Like if you're following the National Geographic or PBS Christmas specials, they're like, well, recent research confirms this is exactly what the first Christians believed. You see, for about 2,000 years, people were like, I don't know, maybe that's what, I don't know. Well, in 1940, the Easter sermon of Melito of Sardis, written in the year 165, was discovered after 2,000 years. And this is what he said of this baby. He came to us. He came to us on these accounts. Though he was incorporeal, he formed for himself a body after our fashion, appearing as a sheep, yet still remaining the shepherd, being esteemed a servant, yet not renouncing his sonship, being carried in the womb of Mary, yet arrayed in the nature of his Father, treading upon the earth, yet filling heaven, being esteemed poor, yet not divested of his riches, needing sustenance inasmuch as he was a man, yet not ceasing to feed the entire world. Inasmuch as he is God, putting on the likeness of a servant, yet not impairing the likeness of his Father. He was standing before Pilate, and at the same time was sitting with his Father. He was nailed upon a tree, yet was the Lord of all things. You guys, you see, compared to a beautiful coral reef, when you take a coral reef and compare it to the Son of God, it pales. It pales in comparison. Reality is far stranger, far wilder, far more other, far more supernatural than we realize. We look at the blah surface of the gray ocean, and underneath the surface, a whole other magical world is thriving, exploding, teeming with life. We look at the surface of the Bible, and all we see are words on a page. But underneath the surface is the thriving, exploding world of the supernatural, teeming with life, teeming with hope, and the reality that is more real than anything I could ever discern with my physical senses. Now, this is what I believe. Maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're still trying to figure out, do I even buy this whole Christian thing? Maybe you're kind of more like the wise men. You're kind of still on the journey, trying to figure out what is available. Well, if that's the case, maybe Advent is the perfect season for you. Because the season of Advent is a season of searching. It's a season of searching and waiting and preparing. And some of you know there's an old Christmas carol that says, "Let every heart prepare him room." So today we are starting this season of Advent, 4 weeks to Christmas Eve. It's a time of searching and preparing. And here's what I think it is. It is a season of hope for a new beginning. Think about your own life. It's a season of hope for a new beginning. You live in a wild world where everything is connected and reality is stranger than we thought it was. And the Spirit of God, I believe, haunts every corner of this earth, and he haunts every corner of our days. You see, what the wise men found was real. They found that one that not only came into the world, but the one that could come into our lives. And so here's a simple way to take the journey of Advent. Seek after God. Seek to be a blessing to other people. Seek God and seek to bless other people. We want to help you, especially seek after God. So here's what we want to do. First, if you don't own a Bible, we want you to have one of ours. So there's a bunch of these Bibles on the back table. If you don't own a Bible, we'd like you to have one. And second, for all of you today, we want to give you this Advent devotional. I'm really excited about this. Actually, I'm honored because I actually am one of the authors, but that's not why I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it because that's just one of like 30 entries here. These other people in here are amazing. And this is one we did about 4 years ago. I love it because it's tied to the Inklings, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Dorothy Sayers, G.K. Chesterton, all of these great adventurers. These were people who went out seeking, and we can join them. And so what I'm challenging you to do is pick this up and commit with me. You know what? There's a lot of stuff out of control in my life. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be like the wise men, and I'm going to seek every day from now to Christmas. I'm just going to begin every day with a short reading. It's like a page long. I want to turn my life into a life of prayer and seeking Jesus. So here's the challenge, and you guys have heard it many times, but I need to hear this every year. In the midst of the hurry, in the midst of the worry, will you say, no, I'm going to carve out time, I'm going to make space to seek God? Because here's the truth. Wise men still seek him. Wise women still seek him. In every generation, there have been those who are willing to seek after the one who came seeking them. Amen. Thanks for joining us today as we strive to think carefully about our faith. You can help keep this ministry on the air by making a donation at leverington.org. For now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.